And welcome back to We Are the People. This is your host, Jason Preston, again with my beautiful little bride. Top of the evening.
How are you doing?
Oh, there you go. I'm doing great. How are you?
Don't throw it back. Don't throw it back. No.
I'm always good when you're on. It's always fun. And it's been great having her. And all of our people love you. So thank you guys for joining us. We've got a very, obviously we've been very hot and heavy and very concerned about the abuse that we've been talking about exposing in this state, the trafficking, the ritualistic abuse. We've had survivors on. And today we have a really fascinating show because today we have a therapist on who is very high profile, who has worked with several survivors and who's going to help us understand a little bit about what is going on in this and some things that are important for the people to understand if we're going to fight this. Before we jump in, just remember, please follow us on our website. The reason we're asking you to do that, if you go to our Instagram, we are completely shadow banned, which is crazy because we don't talk about anything hardly political. All we're talking about is what's going on with this stuff in our backyard. And the fact that we're getting so shadow banned should tell you something. So please sign up for our newsletter so that if this stuff gets taken down, it can't stop us from getting this information out. This show is brought to you by Tracy Ball. Tracy, thank you for helping us in this fight. We appreciate all of you who help us with the funding of this. So with that being said, Alexia,
thank you.
It's all you, baby.
Thank you. So we are doing things a little bit differently today. I don't think we've actually had anyone come and actually speak in this capacity. But I thought it would be unique to get an insider's perspective to really answer the question of, is this really going on? Is this real? We've had a lot of shows come on with survivors. Some of them may have aired by now. We've also have many that are going to still come out. But the question has come up time and time again, why don't we see justice? Well, is this really happening? Is this something that could be the, quote, false memory syndrome, unquote, that we saw during the 90s? So I think this is a question we really need to dive into. Because it is so sensitive, we are going to blur our guest for sake of privacy. And it should also give some of our future survivors that may feel the need to come forward just the feeling of comfort to be able to come on and know that your privacy also will be respected. So I don't think we'll get anything too sensitive today, but just want to give a fair trigger warning and disclaimer that we might be talking about some sensitive information. And we are delighted to have with us today in studio an unnamed but very well respected and experienced licensed therapist here in the state of Utah with over 30 years of experience. So I'm going to hand it over to her to introduce this topic to you and answer the question of, is this real and is this really going on here in Utah and elsewhere in the country? So thank you for joining us.
Thank you. I feel very honored and privileged to be here. I'm passionate about this work, and as she said, I've been doing this for a long time. I was there at the beginning of the 90s and the Satanic Panic and all of that, and the False Memory Syndrome Foundation creation, and I am a victim of that, actually, because in the process of doing my work with clients, I have been personally attacked by the powers that be who tried to take my license away and silence my voice, and thus silence my clients' voices. So I understand it from an insider's perspective of what happened and how it happened, and I'd like to take the time I have to kind of lay that out and help people understand how it got this bad, and the heroes, the champions in it, of how they've worked around that and come back. I feel like I'm kind of like a phoenix that rose from the ashes and still surviving and thriving. But we all need to have our voice in this and our to be active in it, or because as Romans 12:21 says, do not be evil. No, do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. And that really is the formula. That's the only way it's going to happen. We have a voice, and we need to speak up. So as a child, real quickly, my only exposure to any of this was the books on my family shelf. My mother was a voracious reader. I was also, and I made it a goal to read every book on their bookshelf on both sides of the fireplace in the front room, from ceiling to floor. And one of those books was The Three Faces of Eve. So I learned the word multiple personality and was fascinated by it. But, you just put it back on the shelf and say, that's interesting. But I knew in high school I wanted to be a therapist, and eventually I did become a therapist, and I've been licensed for over 30 years. I've worked with 30 plus 40 different clients with ritual abuse.
Wow.
A lot.
So you've seen this and can say that it is indeed rampant.
Oh, absolutely. And I remember in my internship during my time of licensure to become a therapist, I was at a mental health clinic for adult outpatient, and I saw a lot of adult women, and I was, submitting the diagnosis to my supervisor to review, and he really chastised me and said, "What is it?" He was very demeaning and said, "What, you just see PTSD under, every rock and throw the diagnosis at your clients?" And I said, "Well, I'm following the book, the diagnostic manual, and if they have those symptoms, then that's what I'm going to prescribe." But he was furious. That was back in the day when PTSD, the word, was even just coined, and they thought it was a very rare thing. And I believe now that a lot of my clients, even back then, were ritually abused, but I didn't have enough time with them to really get into that, but I could see it now. So it's been a lot of resistance uphill all the way from the very beginning of my work. And nobody in their right mind goes into the field and hangs out a shackle and says, "I want to work with ritual abuse victims." You'd have to be crazy, to do so. And but they came to us. They found us, they sought us out, and then our reputation grew, and they came, and, word of mouth. Because I don't advertise, like I said, and say that I do this. It's kind of underground railroad work, so to speak. But when in the beginning I was so shocked and horrified and overwhelmed, I knew that I wanted to do it, but I had to do a deep dive with whatever materials I could find to research and study to make sense of it and to be able to present some hope to my clients, because it's so shocking, and everybody wonders at the beginning, how could this be true? How could this be true? But I think back to what we read if you study your Bible. We accept that it was a part of the Old Testament, but somehow we all go into amnesia over that and decide, well, that was then, this is now, that's not happening anymore. Oh, how horrific to see child sacrifice and all that back in that primitive, old time, centuries ago. But it's alive and well now, very alive and well, and it reaches high levels of power and authority, and it has caused devastation far and wide to the people that it affects. They are my champions, my heroes for surviving this and having the courage to tell their story. So, but I want to put it into perspective that what happened back in the early 90s turned the whole field around from where we thought we were going. Because in the late 80s, 80% of the coverage in outlets talking about therapy were weighted towards stories of survivors with recovered memory being taken for granted, and questionable therapy wasn't brought up and challenged. But then 3 years later, more than 80% of the coverage focused on false accusations, often involving supposedly false memory. And so you wonder, how did that happen?
Yeah, so can I just kind of recap for listeners? Uh-huh. So a lot of this, there was this huge wave of stuff that just started becoming unearthed in the 80s.
In the 80s, yes.
And it was story after story after story of these victims are coming forward. And it wasn't just in Utah. I mean, there was a ton, but it was going across Boys Town. And I mean, there was stories all over of this stuff, just getting exposed.
And Martin, preschool, all over.
All over. And so one of the crazy things is people say, well, what happened? Well, these people had to find, how do we silence these people?
Right.
And so she's going to say, well, how did we go from all these things and all these stories to discrediting them? Yeah. And this is very important. especially for those of you who are current survivors who are wanting to come forward, because if you do not understand this and you go through a lot of the traditional therapies, they are intended to discredit you right out of the gun so that you can never get help or never be believed.
And you will still hear from most mainstream therapists that it's bunk, that you must have run into a therapist somewhere who influenced you and created false memories.
Yes.
And that's the story.
So talk to us about where the false memories came from.
So the false memory syndrome foundation came from a woman named Jennifer Freyd, and in her 30s, she was getting ready to go to visit her parents over Christmas and start having panic attacks. And she then a memory came back to her, and she told her husband about it, that she suspected that she was abused by her father. And her father was the one that confronted, her husband was the one that confronted her father. And they immediately went into defensive mode and denied it, and wrote, and his wife, Pamela, Peter Freyd's wife, Pamela, wrote an article in a journal saying, how did this happen? How did we get here? And they didn't give their daughter's name, but they discredited her. And that wasn't enough. They decided they needed to create a formal organization to arm themselves with the backing that they needed to protect themselves from being outed and accused of abuse. And the people that they created on their board kind of tells it all. I'm just going to read one quote about one of the main people that was on their advisory board, and that was a Dr. Underwager, one of the founding members. He was also the founder of VOCAL, which stood for Victims of Child Abuse Laws, a support group for people who claimed to be falsely accused. He had already famously stated in the media and in court that 60% of women sexually abused in childhood reported that the experience was good for them. So this was the people that they were drawing to them for this foundation. And most of them have now been outed as being pedophiles themselves. Wow. But it gained strength, and they had Elizabeth Loftus, who is a well-known researcher, who claimed that false memory was faulty, that there was, that you couldn't have that repressed memory. But we now know a lot in 30 years about that traumatic memory is different from normal, everyday, working memory. So anyway, they gained.
Make sure you're speaking into the.
They gained a lot of presence and attacked. Their motive was to intimidate any therapist that claimed that they were working with a victim of ritual abuse. They especially went after people diagnosing multiple personality disorders, which then changed to dissociative identity disorder because that word got so tainted, and then the controversy regarding alleged satanic ritual abuse. So they were vicious, and they one of the people I ran into and know about put a big ad in the paper as he traveled around the country and advertised for clients who were disgruntled with their therapy or wanted, and he said, if you hire me, I can earn you $10 million to take your therapist down by, with this thing he had going about how to attack them. And so it was a business for him. And that went on for many, many years. But in 2019, it just announced the cessation of the False Memory Syndrome Foundation because it lost its strength, and because research has now turned the other way and shown, in a credible way, that false memories are not the origin of these memories, that they're real memories, and we have a lot more people backing them up. And I'm so grateful for that, because that shut down a lot of healing to all of the victims that desperately needed it over this past 30 years. I grieve deeply for all of those that, got smashed, stomped on, and shut down for trying to raise their voice. So anyway, she, in turn, Jennifer, the daughter who made the claim against her parents, went on to become a therapist, and she has now written a book called Blind blind to trauma, no, blind to betrayal. And she's explained in great depth how and why people forget, why it goes into amnesia. And
Or dissociative state otherwise.
right. And when people come in to see me, they don't usually come in saying, I know that I have dissociative identity disorder and I know that I was ritually abused. They come in with a set of symptoms. They don't have memories so much that they're connecting. They have a lot of symptoms. They have weird behavior. They have health problems. They have relationship problems. And they're in distress and they've hit the wall. They've managed to, put on a front for so many decades, but it finally crashes and burns and they come in. And they present saying, I'm either psychotic, they really believe they're psychotic, or they believe that they're possessed by the devil. And I listen to them and we talk about that. And I say, there's a third option. I don't know if you've ever heard of that or considered it. And I start explaining dissociative identity disorder to them. And most of them have not heard about it. They don't understand it. So I explain it. And the best explanation I have for that is simple and makes sense is your brain is kind of like the thermostat in your house that regulates the temperature. And when it goes awry, there's a switch on your template, on your box that switches off. So that's to prevent the system from burning up, from a fire to start in your home or, something disastrous. I said your brain has a protective mechanism much the same way. When you're overwhelmed and overloaded with too much traumatic information that you can't process, you have nowhere to put it, nowhere to go, it's overwhelming you, your brain shuts down.
And this is the intent that they're going for if there is a ritualistic abuse situation.
And the ritual abusers create it on purpose.
To fracture.
To fracture.
Not aware. So they
Yes.
can go through normal society as a normal
Yes.
person, not knowing that
Right.
at night times they're getting tortured. And
Yes. So if anybody wants to understand that, the best, watch The Manchurian Candidate, because that movie will teach you systematically how the military did it to make their candidates that they wanted to be killers, in the army or the military to go out and do it because they had to shut down on their moral conscience and be robots. And so it systematically shows you that process of whittling away and attacking them, their credibility and their memory so that they had amnesia.
And this might sound crazy to some of our viewers who are not familiar with it, but MK Ultra is a documented military experiment that was going on as early as the 60s and 70s.
I know it started.
It came over after World War II.
When they started bringing back some of the
Nazi
doctors from the Germans from
from
the
the Nazi regime.
Yeah.
And so, but all of this ritual abuse didn't start back in the 40s.
But that's when they started really mastering
it.
in a
Yes.
scientific way.
Yes.
And I know some of this stuff may sound crazy, but the fact of the matter is, this is a world that has been blowing Alexia and I away. The more we've looked at this, and I know it's hard for people to understand, but I've just become absolutely convinced this is very real. This is happening not only in our own backyard, but with the CIA and it's
documented.
It's hard. It is just hard to believe. But look, this is when people talk about the great wickedness in this world. This is exactly what it is. I mean, Satan is ruling this world, and it is. And there is a world underneath this world that operates that I think most of our listeners and most people would just have a hard time believing. But the fact of the matter is, I believe it's very real.
It's very real. And it's been going on since time began, and each country and area of the world has their own version of it. And here in Utah, ours is tainted more to a twisted version of LDS. And that's the one that's prominent right now is outing the LDS Church of Satan with David Hamlin and group. But they're not the only ones by far. They're just a very prominent group who Hamlin's daughter, being incredibly brave, came forward and gave, volumes of testimony 10 to 15 years ago. That's now being discounted and, pushed away. And with the agencies bumbling their efforts to bring it to trial, which I understand, but I'm horribly shocked and disappointed and angered by it because they all deserve their day in court. So Yeah, I know. I sat at a table with DCFS one time after I'd called a grandfather to account and took the child out of the home and had to justify why I thought he should be out of the home. And I, I looked around the table and realized as I was describing what had been told to me by the adult children of this man, of wild and crazy things going on in their home, that everyone at the table looked at me like I was a Martian that had just dropped down from outer space talking to them and like talking a foreign language, and they just, they just glazed over and didn't want to hear any of it. So that's the typical reaction I get from most every agency. Even sadly, sometimes the LDS Church officials that my colleagues and I have for decades now have gone to them and offered to train bishops. We went to family services and asked them, have you heard of what we're hearing, and told them what we're hearing, and they kind of laughed, or maybe it was nervous laughter, I don't know, but we haven't got very far. Haven't got very far at all.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the church, did commission the Glenn
Yes.
Pace to go out and do research, and he interviewed 60 victims, over 60 victims, and came back and presented that this stuff was very real, that he's been experiencing. They're seeing it, and I would encourage people to go read that if you haven't.
Absolutely.
So, this clearly, and that memo did get silenced. But yeah, so that is a frustrating thing. Why is, and that's one of my, one of my concerns is why is this? Why are we not taking this, more seriously?
I cried a lot when I heard that his voice had been silenced and he was sent on a mission to Africa.
It's
And
almost like they spend more energy trying to debunk it than trying to prove that it actually is happening in the public sphere.
yeah.
Or defend people.
Exactly.
And I'm sure, if I were to take a poll, it's driven by fear. It's driven by fear of what would happen if we take a stand. I'm afraid to a certain degree, which is why I'm covering my face. So I don't want to be a hypocrite and say, I don't get it, because I do. And we all have to be smart about how we approach it and what we do to stand up and have a voice. But agencies in lockstep have not wanted to take it on because I think they fear that their credibility will be destroyed, that they'll be taken down, they'll lose funding, et cetera, et cetera. So they don't. But the other part is why they don't is explained by Dr. Freyd, the woman who called out her parents and started the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, because we as the human beings can't wrap our brains very well around the atrocities that we're hearing spoken of any more than the client, that I work with has to be able to make sense of what they went through. Because as they report it, it feels like a twilight dream that they're talking about. Like it couldn't be me that this happened to. I'm just having these awful dreams. Where did they come from, And then we find out as we do body work, because body work is very important to the process of healing. It can't be just all cognitive and logical. It has to be felt in your body and connecting your thoughts with your emotions and your body sensations to make it real. And when that happens, then they can start to take it in and believe it.
So it's really the subconscious that holds the memory, even if the conscious mind is fractured.
Yes, it's still there, and it comes out in weird ways when they've split off into parts that contain the memories. They don't die. They don't go away. They're just submerged, it's in the subconscious, and we have to bring it up to conscious awareness. And there's lots of modalities, thankfully, now that have been developed, EMDR and energy work and tapping and neurofeedback and alpha theta and all kinds of means to bring those repressed, shocking memories that are buried but are driving their behavior in ways that are driving them crazy. And why do I do what I do? Kind of questions I get 1,000 times a week. Up to the conscious so that they can see it with clarity and start to make sense of their own story. The woman you had on last week was one of the rare few, Mary Beth, that never forgot. And that's a mystery. It's hard to say who's going to remember it and who's going to bury it.
See, but Mary Beth wasn't ritualistically abused.
Okay.
And I think that's, from the people we've been interviewing.
And that makes a difference.
The ritualistic is meant to terrify them so badly that there is their body, they have no choice but to place a wall to protect them from that memory.
Yes, and thank you for bringing that up. That's what I see so much of, is that it's a torture system, and it shuts them down. They go into amnesia, and they just can't let themselves remember because it's too painful. It's too shocking to reconcile that happened in this body, and I'm still walking around. How can that be? But I've had clients that, as we're doing the work and they're in a big emotion and they're remembering something real, it's called stigmata. And it's what, people who were really intensely passionate about Jesus and sad about him dying on the cross, they would get bleeding. They would get a mark on their palm. But people who, starting to describe some of the torture they received, they would start being bruised in that area. It would pop up and manifest on their skin. So it's a witness to them.
Even years or decades later.
Years and decades later. I've seen it in real time come out as we're in the middle of a session. And so they do the systematic torture with shocking people, with torture, with needles, with drugs, any way possible to put them in a very much of a stupor so they can manipulate them.
So I hope that makes sense to our listeners, those who are wanting to understand why is it that there's these memories, why is it they don't know anything about it, and all of a sudden they have these memories. And I think one of the reasons I think Alexia and I can relate to this is Alexia has had abuse in her childhood, both that she remembers and periods of years where she can't remember, So I thought that was one of the things so for us, we understand that.
Yes. Sure. And I one of the things that I've been fascinated about is also the study of epigenetics, which is the generational patterns. Mm-hmm. So is there even ways that these things can show up that might have happened to parents or ancestors before, some generational trauma?
Oh, definitely. And a good book to read is It Didn't Start With You by Mark Wolin. And he talks about the intergenerational transmission process of trauma. One night when I came home after a very intense day, and I'd heard some new shocking information from a client who was revealing and remembering things about her ritual abuse. And I came home, and my youngest daughter was 9, and sometimes she got scared and wanted to come in my bed and snuggle for a little while. And so we fell asleep, and the next morning she woke up and said, "Mom, I had the most scary dream I've ever had." She started to describe her dream, and her dream was remnants, was symbolic of what my client had told me the day before.
How is that possible?
The energetic transmission process. It was in the air, I guess, in the atmosphere, that I was carrying all the weight of the burden of hearing that and trying to process it myself. And she was a very sensitive soul and picked up on it. You know how you walk in a room and pick up on the emotions of somebody else by their facial features or what they're projecting out. Something about it. I can't totally explain it. I just know it happened.
Like extreme empathy.
Extreme empathy, yeah, for that burden that I was carrying and hadn't completely processed and talked through and cleared out of my system yet.
Well, that also goes to show just how sponge-like children are and why it's so detrimental when you're talking about ritualistic abuse, when that's done, the first 6 or 8 years of their life, when they're so impressionable.
Oh, yeah.
And those are the times when most of this ritualistic stuff is typically done. Right. It's within those 6 to 8 years where
4 to 6.
Yeah, and
below 6 and 8 years old.
Yeah,
and they're in their subconscious.
Sure, and they systematically approach them and dismantle every belief they have and every person that they should trust in by scaring them to death and making them and setting up situations in the abuse to make them believe that they were the one that initiated it. They put their hand over, the perpetrator puts their hand over the kids when they make them, kill an animal or something, and then blame them. So they're burdened with all these horrific things that in their right mind they would never, ever, ever do. But they carry that burden around in a very repressed way. And that's the other thing. When I hear a person coming into my office and they're just full of negative self-talk. I'm a horrible person. I'm awful. I'm wicked. I can't be forgiven. The bell alarm goes off. I wonder what happened to you.
We had a survivor who we were talking with, and she said one of the things that she was aware of is even as infants, they would do things with their fingers to the baby that would give it intense amount of pain. And while the baby was in intense pain, they would yell at it and tell them it was worthless and ugly and horrible while they were torturing it. And they said that was part of like getting it and driving it deep into their subconscious.
Absolutely. And then they do Stockholm Syndrome on top of that. And Stockholm Syndrome is when you're the one that the perpetrator that sets up the problem and then you rescue them.
Yes.
So
These people are sick.
after doing that you just described, then they come in and they're the one that whoosh them up and comfort them and calm them down. The handler, you know, and so it's crazy making all the way around, and the child is so confused. They don't know who to trust, what to trust, how to trust, because they're so broken. But I just want to go back and read this for a second. That what I was talking about earlier, how we dismiss it because we want to put it back there, that it happened a long time ago and it can't happen again. The way I've made sense of it is to put it in the context of the original battle in the war in heaven between Jesus and Satan. Because Jesus won the battle by honoring God and willingly doing his will, and Satan was cast out and denied glory. His ongoing main goal is to thwart and obstruct Jesus' mission, obviously. I've concluded that Satan doesn't have an original thought in his brain, not one. Everything that he does, every effort and action, his entire mission is to obstruct Jesus' efforts by getting people to do the opposite of what God desires and Jesus models for us. So that's how I made sense of the rituals that people kept telling me about. And also, I'm so, every therapist who does this work does it at peril of their own life and sanity. But why would I create false memories? How could I create false memories? I'm not that smart to do that to somebody. And I couldn't sustain a good practice if I've been doing this to people for 30 years, So I came to the conclusion that it's just Satan's way of tipping upside down Christ's world and making a mockery of it. So thus, every ordinance instituted by Jesus, baptism, the sacrament, his crucifixion, resurrection, and every ordinance in the gospel, including marriage, is usurped and presented in an upside down, inside out, backwards, opposite manner in ritual abuse. Because that's what all of the victims talk about. And it's stunning to me how similar their stories are.
Yeah.
They describe the same kind of ordinances being warped and twisted. And all of them that I've asked, where did they never read a book. They didn't watch movies. They were actually kind of scared of that. They haven't talked to other survivors. They just remember this in their dreams or wherever it came up. And it's violent and it's cruel and shockingly perverse, which causes the brain to shut down, block awareness of these events that are perpetrated by the satanic abusers, and then through dissociation, file it away somewhere out of conscious awareness, which protects the victim from annihilation until some point in the future when hopefully they have strength to face it. And so it's a merciful thing, the dissociation, but it also blocks them from, getting help earlier on. And why would you get help if your, family and friends and bishops and school teachers are going to have a glazed over look and be in shock and, don't know what to do with it? Then the child gets the message, this is too much. I'm too much. I'm making it up. This is too horrible. I can't talk.
And they're threatened.
And they're threatened.
If you
and
do
they're
this,
trapped.
and
Yes.
if you come out and talk, they're actually programmed to commit suicide.
Right.
And then it's very easy for the perpetrator to say, look, nobody has ever been able to come out and get justice. Like
Yes.
nobody's believed anybody. Like look at the Hamlin girls. There has been no justice. So of course these kids are terrified, and these adults are terrified of exposing it because the justice system has consistently destroyed them.
Right. But in my 30 plus years of being a therapist, I've never had one client commit suicide, ever.
Wow.
Ever.
Congratulations.
And that's, that's pretty amazing because they've been up against the wall in the most severe kinds of situations and in more despair than I can imagine. But none of them have.
So that begs the question: Can you deprogram
Yes.
someone?
Yes,
And
you
is that-
can. Yes, you can. And at first, the therapy is intense, and it's not going to be covered in 6 sessions with an EAP or with 12 sessions at LDS Family Services. That's a slap in the face. It's intense. It's 3 to 5 years. And I've had some blessed bishops who supported that cause, and their client couldn't pay for it, but they supported them, and they are healed. They've gotten married. They've gotten businesses. They didn't kill themselves, and they're living a good life.
And I think it's important to shout out those bishops who,
Oh.
who because we call out
Call out the ones
Absolutely.
who don't stand up. So
Yeah.
I think it's very important to call out the bishops who
do.
And
So
I've
thank
met
you to
some
those.
really courageous, wonderful bishops, and I love them for their courage and their commitment to their members, because it makes all the difference.
So what would you say to someone who suspects they might be a victim or a survivor of ritualistic abuse or SRA that doesn't have any memories per se, but might have some of the symptoms that you've experienced?
Yeah, don't dismiss it. Take it seriously and believe that there is help out there, and go to a therapist. And if it doesn't feel right, leave. You're not obligated to stay with that therapist. Please them. If they're not, giving you satisfactory help, but don't give up. Keep looking, and with what's going to be coming out with a list of therapists that are trained and are skilled and aren't just saying that they know what they're doing when they don't, because I hear a lot of that, and that's very disappointing to me. But there are enough of us that are committed to this that if they want the help, they can get it.
Are there any books you would recommend they read if they weren't ready to take the step to meet with someone?
Yes, lots of books. The Confronting Abuse, which was written by Ann Horton, one of my mentors, and I love her. She was at BYU. She wrote the first book for the church on confronting abuse, an LDS perspective on understanding and healing emotional, physical, sexual, psychological, and spiritual abuse. She had a whole chapter in there on ritual abuse.
Oh, wow.
Unfortunately, in the midst of the satanic panic and false memory syndrome foundation height of their voice, they pulled it off the shelves.
Of course they did.
They pulled it off the shelves. I was so upset about it. But I have several.
when they got the media and everyone is silenced,
Yeah.
they had to get the books out too. Again,
I know.
And they did a very good job stopping the narrative.
Silencing the voice everywhere on every platform. But a new book out is by Ryan Anderson, and he kind of followed up on Ann Horton's book, and it's called The Choice to Leave Abuse. And it's written for bishops, for parents, for families, for the victims. It's not just about ritual abuse, but I would recommend that book in general, just to get courage to know that you have a voice in it, and just to follow the things I just said, to don't give up. Keep looking, keep asking. Your life is worth it. And there are a lot of, and because of the internet and podcasts and books out there, just go to Amazon and type in ritual abuse, and there are some really good books there too. Well, satanic ritual abuse just means that they have an organized nexus that they center it around following, like the LDS Church of Satan claims that, going back to what I was talking about, the flipping of the whole plan of salvation, that Jesus isn't the rightful heir, that Satan was, and he was robbed and kicked out, and they're trying to put him back in his place. So,
and that it's organized.
It's
It
organized.
is like an
It's
organized
Religion. There's with organizational structure. There's
Right.
roles. There's that people play. There's accountability. There is literal organizational structure, not just one-off isolated abuse
Right.
that can be satanic.
Right.
So
I mean,
that's
there
one
are
of the
there are
big
those rogue players that just have a quirky demonic bent and go read some books and practice that. I have a client like that who's horribly abused by her father, who's very wealthy, but he practiced all of the ritual stuff, but he wasn't. I don't think he was part of a cult. Regular, child abuse is somebody crossing the boundaries and violating a child's in their private parts and taking advantage of them. But they don't have such a systematic, like you said, way of breaking down all their beliefs and flipping it into believing a whole different, religious belief system.
So as we wrap it up, what would your final thoughts and words be to the people watching, maybe to either survivors or to the general public?
Go talk to, if you meet somebody and you suspect that they're very traumatized, don't dismiss it. Encourage them. Be their friend. Encourage them to get help and say that I can see by the struggle that you're having that you're probably, you're not going to come right out and diagnose them or anything, but just be a friend and encourage them. That you'd love to hear when they're ready something of what's caused them to be struggling with what they're dealing with, because they don't want to talk. They're afraid they're going to be shut down and made fun of or dismissed, so be aware, pay attention in where you live and who you're around, and know that it's going on everywhere. It could be the person sitting next to you in your Sunday school class. It could be your neighbor down the street. It could be, and it has been for me, and it's shocking that some of the people on the peripheral of the Hamlin case are people I know. Yeah. Shocking to me, beyond belief, because I'm pretty aware. How did they pull that over on me? But it's that duplicity that they can be one person in normal life and behind closed doors, and they switch into that part that participates in the ritual abuse. Yeah.
And
they can be both people, and that's the reality.
And that's the hard part for many people to accept this as truth, between the injustices of the justice system never actually being able to convict anyone or even giving anyone much of a day in trial outside of smaller cases. There's plenty have been debunked in the 1980s with the Satanic Panic and the controversy around the Glenn Pace memo, and even different therapists. The famous case of the Lehigh therapist, Dr. Barbara Snow, right, which was also a big debunking point, which still comes back up, and why therapists sometimes get a bad rap for trying to expose these things. And that's why it's important to hear from present-day therapists things that you're seeing over the last 30 years of experience.
Yeah, I'm not crazy. I'm not delusional. I'm not bought and paid for, and I love my clients so much. They've inspired me and taught me so much with the battle that they've gone through, and their bravery is beyond anything I can imagine, and I'll fight for them to the death, because they're some of the most beautiful people that I will ever meet, and I stand with them against this evil. So, how do we expect children to be brave enough to say what they need to say if we as parents, teachers, church leaders aren't brave enough to ask and listen? And so, that's where we have to start, is by being brave enough to look at this and not just say, oh, that's too awful, I don't want to look at it.
Alex, any other thoughts?
Growing up, I heard lots of blanket terms being thrown out. It was very common to diagnose someone as bipolar, hear ADHD now, and you hear certain diagnoses like this, and you just thought it was a widespread epidemic of children with, personality or behavioral disorders.
Yes.
But it makes you wonder, the more you dig into this, how much of it is because of the rampant SRA and ritualistic abuse that we're seeing in our communities.
They formed those symptoms. Yeah. In graduate school 30-something years ago, we were taught in one of our classes when we were studying all the diagnoses that be very cautious and don't take more than one or two borderlines on your caseload or you're an idiot. And that's what our teacher told us. We're a fool because they can never get better. And I'm here to say, not true. Wow. They can, and they will with proper treatment. So get the book by Jennifer Freyd on blindness betrayal, because it talks all about this and how we can orient ourselves to be more self-aware, more proactive, more present, to do some good.
Yeah, thank you. Well, in closing, I think the one thing that's been sticking in my mind is the Masaru Emoto rice experiment. And we can even put that on the screen. We could put
I love
clip
that
on
book very much.
it's powerful.
Yes.
Because
The water crystals.
yes, exactly. And it shows, it shows very well how important the developmental stage and growth of a child is, as exemplified by rice. And I mean, we could put up a video, or I can just simply talk about it high level. But basically, it's I believe 3 different containers of rice and water, and you talk to one nicely, and it gives off a fragrant, lovely smell, and it flourishes as much as rice can flourish. And another one you talk poorly to, and it turns moldy and brown and decays. And then one you completely ignore. And I think that's a perfect example for what we're seeing with patterns of ritualistic abuse. As people grow up with this in their history into grown adults, you see those scars of their childhood, whether they are dormant or they are visible. And as we become more aware of this, we shouldn't be living in a state of paranoia. Oh my gosh, something happened to me, or oh my gosh, my neighbor might be involved with this. But maybe finding more ways that we can approach and talk to people in our communities and find the available resources once we're able to diagnose and spot them, maybe not as trained professionals, but especially as we have resources like trained professionals like you here to help us. So
thank you, baby. And thank you so much for coming on. We appreciate you and your courage and everything you've been doing for years to fight for these incredible, incredible people.
You're welcome.
And last thing I just want to share, because you brought up a good point, and we just got a comment from someone about Shalom Levitt, who recently spoke, and they said, well, I listened to her talk, and it was so actually inspiring, and how could it be that, she allegedly had done these things, and of course, I don't know that she did those things. It's alleged, and I happen to believe that she did. But one thing I have come to see is true evil is not Satan out there, being overtly dark and evil. True evil is evil that masquerades as a shepherd by day, stands up as our moral leader, stands up as and puts themselves in moral positions of authority, and then by night they're wolves that are ravening and ravaging on the flock. Mm-hmm. That is true evil. That's what true evils are. That's our politicians. It is within our, it is within certain positions of the church. I'm very convinced of that. Of most corporate churches, but that is true evil. And I think we're so trained to look for evil as, the guy smoking a cigarette, and the guy
and
with
what
the
the movie portrays
Yeah,
ritual
right.
abuse to be,
Right.
that it's just
but
obvious.
But
and
true
dark, yeah.
evil is evil that lies and masks itself as our authority is, and wants to rule us on our moral teachings as well as in darkness. But, God is shining light on this stuff. I think God, it is amazing how much stuff is coming to light and is coming to surface. And God bless all of you who are starting to reach out to us. We are growing our team that is behind the scenes of people who are taking calls and meeting you and getting to know your stories. We are committed to hearing your stories. We're also committed to working with organizations like Relentless Hope and organizations like this incredible therapist and other therapists to make sure that we are helping. Again, it's not us. That's not who we are. We're not here to help anyone through because we're not qualified, but making sure that people are finding those incredible organizations and people, because there are a lot out there that you cannot trust, that we have learned they're setting themselves up in positions of therapists, allegedly like David Hamblin was, who when the people come for help, they then capture them and keep them silenced. So, yes, it's an incredible world. It is mind-bending. It is. We always thought the Matrix was like the political stuff. No, that stuff's like child's play.
Science fiction movie, right?
Yeah,
It's not. It's the real deal.
The political stuff is child's play.
Yeah.
This world is the real Matrix.
truth is stranger than fiction.
Yeah. So, anyways,
Yes.
thank you guys for all of your support. Thank you for watching this. Those of you who have watched this, you understand what this is about. You are the warriors who are standing and fighting and rescuing these people. And just as much as we need people to come and expose it, we need the warriors who will stand for those people, and that is you. So to those of you who've sat through this, who are willing to understand and want to understand, God bless you, because I believe that that's a calling from God to stand for these people, because he is looking for warriors to be willing to rescue. And so thank you to everybody. Thank you. You live in this state of great polarity, both of great light and great darkness, and we have a responsibility to fight and to stand for truth and light. And thank you for being that. God bless you.